The envelope is sitting on the gift table between a card from my college roommate and a small wrapped box with lavender ribbon. It doesn't look like anything. Off-white, letter-sized, my name written across the front in my father's handwriting, that architectural print he learned from a drafting class in 1987 and never stopped using. 100 people are standing around me in the Hartwell ballroom, champagne going warm in their hands, and my new husband Dimitri is making his way through the crowd toward me with a look on his face I don't yet understand. I open the envelope. Inside is a document. 12 pages, spiral-bound. The top page reads, Invoice for services rendered, childhood custodial and developmental costs, 1988 to 2010. Total due, $347,614. My father is watching me from across the room. His arms are crossed. He is smiling. I fold the document in half, tuck it under my arm and go find my grandmother. Welcome to Calm Revenge Tales. I'm glad you're here. This channel is for the people who were told to be grateful for things that were never gifts, and who eventually quietly found a way to hand it all back. If that sounds like your kind of story, subscribe before we go any further. Justice takes a little time to arrive. I want to make sure you're here when it does. My name is Renata Szymborska. I'm a forensic accountant. I have been, since I was 24 years old, the kind of person who reads the footnotes before the headline and never signs anything she hasn't drafted herself. This is not a personality trait I was born with. It's a survival skill I developed in a specific household, for specific reasons, and I am not embarrassed about it. By the time I was 31, I owned a 2-bedroom condo in Cleveland Heights, drove a 7-year-old Subaru with new tires and a clean title, and billed 43 clients through my own LLC. I had done this without a single dollar from my parents. Not because they were poor. My father, Waldemar Szymborski, was a civil engineer. My mother, Bettina, managed the finances for a chain of dental practices. They were comfortable in the particular airtight way of people who keep careful score of everything they spend and everything they are owed. The person I was closest to in my family was my grandmother, Helena. Helena Szymborska was 81. She lived in a rented room in a senior residential complex in Parma, which my parents considered a reasonable arrangement. She had emigrated from Krakow in 1969 with $40 and a suitcase. She had raised 2 sons, buried 1 husband, and learned English from soap operas and library books. She made a soup called zurek that I have never tasted anywhere else on earth, with a sourness that takes 3 days to develop and a hard-boiled egg floating in the center that she would always slice in half for me, because she knew I preferred it that way. My parents called her once a week on Sundays for 11 minutes. I visited her every other Thursday and stayed for 3 hours. This was not a competition. It was just a fact about who we each were. The wedding had been my parents' idea in the way that their ideas always were. They announced it as if it were already true and waited to see if I would contradict them. We'll host the reception at the Hartwell, my mother said, 9 months before the date. Your father knows the events manager. The Hartwell was a downtown venue that ran $10,000 for a Saturday evening. Dimitri and I had been planning something smaller. His parents' backyard, a caterer we'd already interviewed, string lights, 60 people. We had a spreadsheet. That's very generous, I said. But we have a plan. It's already done, she said. Consider it our gift. My father followed up the next day with a list of conditions. The guest list would include his professional contacts, 16 names I didn't recognize. The menu would be approved by my mother. The seating chart would place Helena at a table near the kitchen, away from the head table, because my father explained she sometimes had trouble following conversations, and it would be less stressful for her. I understood what he was doing. I had been watching him do it my entire life. I called Helena that night. She was quiet for a moment after I explained the seating arrangement. Tell him I would like to sit near the window, she said. I like to watch the street. I put her at table 3 near the window for seats from the head table. My father didn't notice until the day of the rehearsal, and by then it was already printed. I should have understood from the way his jaw moved when he saw it that he was keeping count. The ballroom was warm and loud, and the string quartet was playing something from Dvorak that Helena had requested when I asked her weeks earlier what music she wanted to hear. I had not told my parents that the choice was hers. I just put it on the list. She was sitting at table 3 in a blue dress she'd had since 1994, which she had taken in herself at the waist because she was smaller than she used to be. She looked to me like exactly what she was, a woman who had come to her granddaughter's wedding. The dinner had barely been cleared when my father tapped his glass. He spoke for 4 minutes. He talked about sacrifice. He talked about investment. He used the word investment 3 times. He talked about how children don't understand when they're young what it costs to raise them, and how someday he was looking at me, someday they come to appreciate it. People smiled politely. Dimitri's mother, Oksana, had gone very still beside me. Then my father reached into his jacket pocket and produced an envelope. He walked it to me himself, set it on the table in front of me, patted it once with 2 fingers. "A little paperwork," he said, loud enough for the nearest 4 tables to hear. "Something to think about on the honeymoon." He went back to his seat. My mother was looking at her hands. I opened it. 12 pages. Spiral bound. $347,614. It was itemized. Food, clothing, school fees, medical costs, extracurriculars, a line item for emotional labor that he had valued at $12,000 flat. He had calculated compound interest at 4.2% annually from my 18th birthday. I read the first page. I read it the way I read everything, carefully, completely, without showing anything on my face. Then I looked up. Helena was watching me from table 3. Her hands were folded in her lap. She had seen my father hand me the envelope. She knew what that motion meant. She had seen it before in other rooms in other decades. She said nothing. She just looked at me, steady, and gave the smallest nod. I stood up. "I appreciate the thoroughness," I said. "I'll have a response prepared." My father's smile didn't move. He thought I was folding. I picked up my clutch, took Dimitri's hand, and walked to table 3. "Babsha," I said, "would you like to go get coffee? I know a place that's open late." "I would like that very much," she said. We left. All 3 of us through the side door, while the string quartet finished the Dvorak. Someone at table 7 started to stand. I saw it from the corner of my eye, some guest who had been watching, and then sat back down. Nobody followed us out. I want to be clear. I did not feel like I had lost something. I felt like I had set something down that I had been carrying for a very long time, and was finally tired of holding. The first month was loud logistically. Dimitri and I moved Helena from the Parma facility to a larger room in a complex in Lyndhurst, $1,200 more per month, which we split by cutting our vacation budget and refinancing one of my smaller investment accounts. I told Dimitri we didn't have to do it. He told me he'd already called the facility. I stopped billing 2 of my smaller clients and picked up a larger municipal contract to make up the difference. Took 6 weeks to close. During those 6 weeks I ate a lot of rice and roasted vegetables, which I have never minded, and I kept a notebook on my kitchen counter where I tracked every number without commentary, just columns. My parents called twice. The first call was my mother, who said they were hurt, and that Dimitri must have a bad influence on me, and that family was family. I let her finish. I said I agreed that family was family. I did not say anything else. The second call was my father. He said the invoice was a conversation starter. He said he'd been advised. He used that word, advised, that it was a reasonable way to open a discussion about family financial dynamics. He said he didn't want things to be like this. I asked him if the invoice included Helena's costs. He went quiet. "She's not on the invoice," he said. "No," I said. "She wouldn't be." There was a folder on my desk by this point. Manila, unlabeled, sitting between my client files and a stack of professional journals. I had been adding to it for 3 weeks. I did not tell anyone about it, including Dimitri, because the right time hadn't come. The Thursday visits continued. Helena's new room had a window that faced a small courtyard with a pear tree. In October it dropped pears onto the brick path and the groundskeeper swept them up each morning, and Helena watched him from her chair and called it a waste. "I could make preserves," she said one afternoon. "Let's ask him," I said. We asked. He gave us a bag of pears and looked pleased that someone wanted them. She made preserves. 12 jars, half pint, labeled in her handwriting with the year and a small drawing of a pear. She gave me 4. She gave 2 to the groundskeeper. She put the rest on her windowsill. I still have 2 of those jars. I have not opened them. I don't plan to. If you're watching this and you feel the ground shifting under this story, you're not wrong. The hardest part is still coming. Subscribe now so the rest of it finds you. Helena had a stroke in the last week of February. It was a Tuesday. I was in a deposition. She died on a Thursday, at 4:47 in the afternoon. The pear tree in the courtyard was still bare. The preserves were on the windowsill. I sat with her for 2 hours after. Her last words to me 3 days earlier in the hospital were characteristic of her. I was holding her hand and she looked at me for a long time and then she said, "Renata, you know what you're worth. Don't let anyone tell you the price." I wrote it in my notebook that night. I did not write anything else. My parents came to the funeral. My father stood very straight through the service and said nothing. My mother cried in a way that seemed to be mostly for the room. Afterward, at the reception, my father pulled me aside and said that Helena had always been difficult, that she had never been easy to love, and that he hoped I understood now why he had made the choices he had. I looked at him for a moment. I saw his hands, they were clasped in front of him too tightly, the knuckles pale. I could have said many things. I chose not to. "I understand," I said, which was true, just not in the way he meant. 3 days after the funeral, I received a letter from an attorney's office in Parma. The attorney's name was Marta Wierzbicki. She had a small office above a pharmacy on Broadview Road, and she had been Helena's attorney for 11 years. She called me before the letter arrived as a courtesy. "Your grandmother left a will," she said. "There are some details you should hear in person." I drove to Parma on a Wednesday morning. The manila folder was in my bag. Helena had, over the course of 40 years in the United States, saved money in the particular invisible way of someone who had learned that visible savings could be argued over. She had a savings account. She had 2 certificates of deposit, renewed automatically every 3 years since 1991. She had a small IRA she'd opened with money from a part-time bookkeeping job she'd held for 9 years without ever mentioning it to her sons. Total estate, $218,400. Left entirely to me. There was a letter with it, handwritten for pages. It was addressed to Renata. It began, "You asked me once who taught me to make Zurek. I want to tell you the whole story." The letter was, in part, a recipe. It was also a history. It was the most precise and complete document I have ever read, and I have read a great many documents. My parents were not in the will. There was a note, also written by Helena and witnessed by Marta Wierzbicki, explaining why. It was 3 sentences. It said, "My sons received from me what I could give when I had nothing. They chose to treat that gift as an embarrassment. I am leaving what remains to someone who knows the difference between a debt and a gift." I asked Marta if my parents had been notified. She said they would receive formal notice within the week. I opened my bag. I took out the manila folder. "I'll need to file a response to this as well," I said. Marta looked at the folder. "What's in it?" "A counter-invoice," I said. The meeting happened 3 weeks later at Marta's office because that is where it legally needed to happen. My parents arrived together, my father in a blazer, my mother with her reading glasses on a chain. Their attorney, a man named Grover Pesh who specialized in estate disputes, sat beside them. Dmitri waited in the car. He had offered to come in. I told him this was mine. Marta read the will and the accompanying note aloud. My father's face went through several stages. My mother's hands found each other on the table. Then Marta said, Miss Szymborski-Voss has also prepared a document she'd like to enter into the record. She set the manila folder on the table and opened it. My counter-invoice was 14 pages. I had spent 4 months preparing it, which meant I had started it approximately 2 weeks after the wedding, which meant, and this I had known since I was a child, that I had been building it in some form for a long time before I knew I would ever need to use it. It was itemized. Unpaid childcare provided to my parents from age 11 to 18, when I regularly supervised my younger brother while they traveled for work. $24,360, calculated at Cleveland's standard babysitting rate adjusted for inflation. School projects, science fair entries, and extracurricular achievements that my father had presented to his professional colleagues as evidence of his parenting success, for which he had received career-adjacent social capital. Estimated value, $8,200. One college scholarship I had applied for and won without my parents' knowledge, which my father had told his colleagues was the result of connections he had made. Value of false attribution, noted for the record, not invoiced. Interest on the above, calculated at the same 4.2% annual rate my father had used. Total, $41,280. But that was not the main document. The main document was an accounting of Helena. For 22 years, my father had sent his mother $30 a week. He had mentioned this at every family gathering, approximately twice per gathering. Total paid, $34,320. What Helena had actually spent on her grandchildren, confirmed receipted with records Marta had preserved from Helena's files, was $67,440. School clothes purchased without being asked. Birthday deposits made into accounts my parents didn't know existed. A plane ticket for me at 19 to visit a friend in Warsaw, listed in Helena's own hand as education. Medical costs covered quietly when my brother had a gap in insurance at 22. She had given more than twice what she received. She had never once mentioned it. My father's hands went still when Marta read that number. "That's not," he started. "She never said." "No," I said. "She didn't." My mother began to cry. It was different from the funeral crying. Her attorney put a hand briefly on her arm. My father sat back. His blazer had a small pin on the lapel, a professional society emblem he'd worn to every formal occasion I could remember, a small silver drafting compass. He touched it once lightly. That was the only moment I recognized in him something I understood. Not guilt exactly, but the particular stillness of a person who has just seen something they would prefer to have remained unseen. I had the 4 jars of preserves in my bag. I took out one and set it on the table. "She made these in October," I said. "From pears she asked the groundskeeper for, because she didn't want them to go to waste." I looked at my father. "She said she could make something from what other people threw away. She said she'd been doing it her whole life." The room was quiet. "That was Helena," I said. "That was what she was worth." Grover Pesh advised my parents that a challenge to the will would be difficult, expensive, and, given the documented note from Helena, unlikely to succeed. My father asked through Pesh if I would consider a compromise, splitting the estate, keeping things civil. I had thought about this moment. I had decided some time before it arrived that I would make one offer. I would donate 10% of the estate, $21,840, to the senior residential facility in Parma, specifically to fund activities for residents with limited family contact. I would do this in Helena's name. I would let my father's name appear on the plaque as well, if he wished. He declined. I donated the money. The plaque reads, "In memory of Helena Szymborski, who knew how to make something from what others left behind." The estate settled 4 months later. The challenge was not filed. My father sent one final letter through Pesh, which said that he considered our relationship concluded. I read it once and filed it. I responded to my father's original invoice as well, formally in writing through Marta. The response was one sentence: "Per your own accounting methodology, I calculate that I was owed, not indebted, and that the debt, if we are keeping records, ran in the other direction." He did not respond. The pear preserve recipe was on page 3 of Helena's letter. Takes 3 days. The pears have to be peeled and halved and left overnight in sugar, which draws the water out before you ever touch the stove. You have to be patient with it. You can't rush the first stage or the preserves go thin. I made my first batch in November, from pears I bought at a farm stand in Geneva on the lake, where Dimitri and I had driven for a weekend in the fall. I followed the recipe exactly. I labeled them in my own handwriting, small, with the year and a drawing of a pear that looked nothing like hers. I keep one jar on the windowsill of my kitchen. In the morning when the light is right it goes amber. That is what I have from her. Not the money. I have invested most of that carefully in accounts I review once a quarter. What I have from her is the recipe, and the reason she gave it to me, and the knowledge that some things accumulate quietly over decades in a woman who never complained, never announced herself and left when the time came, a record so exact that no one could dispute it. Don't let anyone tell you the price. I think about that every time I open a new file. If anyone in your life has been treated like a footnote, a grandmother, a parent, a sibling, someone who gave quietly and was credited for nothing, call them today. Don't wait for a will to tell you what they were worth. This story belongs to Helena. Subscribe, share it, and leave a comment if you've ever had to hand something back to someone who thought you owed them. I'll see you in the next one.